Okay, so today we're learning about the eukaryotic cell organelles. And your objective is that you are going to be able to describe the main organelles inside of a eukaryotic cell. So what you need to have already done is the check-in. Now you're doing the daily work. After this, I need you to complete the independent practice and the checkout. And of course, all grades are updated as of today, 4/20, so please check and do any missing work that you have. All right, so last week we talked about how eukaryotic cells are cells with a nucleus. And the nucleus is actually an example of an organelle. So the nucleus is the most important part of an object or a cell. And it's like the brain, and that's where all the DNA is stored. So we can remember eukaryotic cells this way. The origin of the word eu is true, and the origin of the word kary is nucleus. So eukaryotic means true nucleus, and that's because the nucleus is the defining characteristic of a eukaryotic cell. So if I look at a cell underneath a microscope and I see that it has a nucleus, I'm going to know that it's eukaryotic. Now, here's a little rhyme you can remember if you want. But now we need to go into more organelles. Our first organelle example that we talked about was the nucleus. And now we're going to move on to more. And organelles are like mini organs inside of cells. Just like we have organs inside of humans that help us survive, such as our brains, our lungs, which help us breathe, our heart, which pumps our blood everywhere. And so all these organs do jobs that help us stay alive. The organelles inside a cell also do jobs that make sure the cell stays alive. And we're going to be covering 6 organelles today. We've already reviewed the nucleus, which is what we learned about last week. And we're going to go into cell membrane, cytoplasm, vacuole, mitochondria, and ribosomes. Now, the cell membrane. So we know what a cell is, but what's a membrane? A membrane is this thin boundary around a living thing. So think of it as a thin or flexible layer around a cell that protects it from the outside. So essentially, you're putting this coat around a cell to keep it safe from everything else that's happening around it. And now the cell membrane has 3 important functions or jobs. The first one is that it keeps toxic or bad substances that could hurt the cell outside of the cell. It also allows water and nutrients to enter the cell, since the cell needs those to survive. And it also lets waste products, so like cell poop, leave the cell. And now we're going to play a little game, matching the cell membrane functions to the picture. So in this first image, I have a picture of poison. And poison is going to be blocked from the cell. Now, my cell poop is going to be leaving the cell. Ramen is a food, so I know that's going to enter the cell. And water, everything living needs water, so water is going to enter the cell too. Now, our second organelle is a cytoplasm. And plasm means to shape, which is actually the function of cytoplasm, is cytoplasm gives the cell a shape. Now, we define cytoplasm as a jello-like liquid that fills the inside of the cell. So we have our organelles in our picture, and everything around the organelles that holds it tight, it's like a little blanket for it, is called the cytoplasm. So it first gives the cell shape, and secondly, it holds everything in place inside of the cell. So it prevents the organelles from bumping into each other and sliding all over the place. Now, our third organelle is a vacuole. And the origin of the word vacuole is the word vac, which means empty. So it makes sense that the vacuole is an organelle whose job is to just store things inside of the cell. So its job is to literally store food for the cell that the cell may need for later, and it also stores waste, or cell poop, as we already know. Oops. Next up, we have the mitochondria, which is the powerhouse of the cell. So the mitochondria produces all the energy a cell needs. And so its job is to convert food into energy for the cell to use. So the mitochondria inside of the cell looks like this, has a little wave design, and there's usually a couple different mitochondria inside of a cell. Our final organelle is called a ribosome. So ribosomes are tiny little organelles floating in the cytoplasm, and they make proteins. So right now I'm going to circle all of my ribosomes, these little blue dots, and these make proteins. That's their job. And proteins are super important because that's what helps keep the cell strong and build up all the different organelles inside of the cell. And so now we have learned all about our organelles in eukaryotic cells. So what I want you to do is make your own key takeaways. I'm not going to accept this unless you have 2 things written down here that you've learned in this lesson. So you need to tell me 2 important things that you've learned today by watching this video, and then you'll submit this assignment and earn a 100%. If you have any questions, message me on Focus. Happy Tuesday!